Late winter leaned against the Wyoming plains like a tired old beast, breathing frost along every fence post, brushing the land with a kind of cold that made even the strongest men move slower than usual. The Holt Ranch sat alone beneath a pale sky, its wooden bones creaking whenever the wind dragged its fingers across the rails. It was a place built on silence, a place where memories stayed because the man who lived there refused to let them go. Elias Holt stepped out onto the porch just as the sun was folding itself behind a ridge, leaving swirls of rose and silver in the sky. He rubbed the back of his neck the way he always did when the day ended too quietly, as if he could scratch away the loneliness collecting at the edges. He expected nothing but wind and empty land, yet his eyes caught something unusual, a trail of small, careful footsteps pressed into the snow that led directly to his porch. At first he wondered if a child had wandered too far from town, but the prints were too even, too deliberate. Someone had walked a long way, and walked with purpose. A moment later, she stepped into view. She moved slowly, not because she was weak, but because she carried herself like someone who had learned to measure every breath. A woman in a worn traveling coat, its sleeves frayed but neat. A cloth bundle held against her chest. Snow dusted her hair as gently as powder on porcelain. She stopped at the porch steps without looking up, her shoulders rising and falling in a quiet rhythm, and Elias felt something strange stir in him, something like caution but softer. When she raised her face, he saw a calmness there that seemed out of place in the biting winter. Her eyes held storms, yet they did not plead. She simply said, in a voice low and even, that she cooked for a day's wage and asked if he might have need of help. Her name, spoken like a leaf drifting down a still stream, was Mei Lin Chen. Elias didn't want help. He didn't want anyone stepping into the hollow spaces of the house where memory still lived like a stubborn ghost. But a colder wind swept across the yard just then, lifting the hem of her coat and revealing shoes barely held together. No traveler should be turned away at dusk, he thought, not even one whose presence unsettled a place that had long been undisturbed. He told her she could cook for the evening meal and that she must leave by tomorrow. His words came out sharper than he intended, but she nodded without flinching, as if she had heard harsher things in harsher places. She stepped inside the house with a quiet grace that made even the floorboards hold their breath. The kitchen had not known the rhythm of skilled hands in years, but Mei Lin moved through it as though the room had been waiting for her. She brushed dust from the counters, stirred life into the stove, and brought warmth back into the air grain by grain. Elias watched her from the doorway, arms folded, trying to understand the uneasy tug beneath his ribs. She didn't hum or speak or fill the silence with anything unnecessary. She simply worked, and each motion seemed to smooth the coldness from the walls. As the scent of vegetables and slow-cooked broth began to wander through the house, old Maggie came in from her rounds at the stables. The older woman paused in the doorway, eyebrows lifting. She greeted Mei Lin kindly and asked where she had come from. Mei Lin answered with soft politeness, offering nothing more than what was needed. Maggie gave Elias a pointed look, the kind that said this woman had weathered more storms than her fragile frame suggested. Tom Weaver barged in soon after, stamping snow from his boots. The sight of Mei Lin made him grin, for he was a man who found joy in any disruption of routine. He praised the smell coming from the pot, chattered about how the ranch hadn't felt this alive since before Elias's wife passed, then fell silent when he realized what he'd said. Elias's jaw tightened, but Mei Lin's eyes lowered as though she felt the shift in the air. When supper was served, the room grew warmer. Tom laughed. Maggie shared old stories. Even the fire crackled more brightly. Mei Lin ate little, but every once in a while Elias caught her watching the others, the faintest softness settling across her features. Not longing, no, something simpler. The quiet recognition of a place that did not seem to fear her. After the table was cleared, Mei Lin gathered the dishes without a word and washed them under lantern light. Her hands moved with familiarity, as if tending to a home were second nature, though nothing about her suggested she belonged anywhere. Elias stepped forward to help, but she shook her head gently, almost shyly, and continued on her own. He found himself standing beside her anyway, not touching anything, simply watching the way the lantern's glow clung to her cheekbones and how her breath rose in tiny clouds above the steaming water. A strange awareness crept into the room, the awareness of two lives brushing against each other, however briefly. Elias, who had buried his heart alongside winter, felt the faintest crack in the ice. Mei Lin, who had walked alone for too long, seemed to allow the smallest flicker of safety to warm her. When the final plate was dried, she folded her hands and asked quietly where she might sleep. Elias pointed her toward the old guest room, the one no one had entered since the year grief had swallowed the house whole. She bowed her head in gratitude and slipped away down the dim hallway. Elias remained in the kitchen long after she left, staring at the soft sway of shadows on the wall. Something had changed in the air, something fragile, unspoken, unexpected. Outside, the wind rose again, brushing against the windows in long, hollow sighs. The ranch had taken strangers before, but this one carried an aura that unsettled the snow itself, as though winter had paused to listen. Elias stepped onto the porch for one last breath of cold night. The sky had darkened, the moon hanging low like a lantern swung by an invisible hand. He scanned the yard out of habit. Nothing moved except the settling dust of frost. Yet when he turned back toward the house, his eyes caught a shape beneath the eaves. A small cloth bundle lay tucked in the corner, half hidden by shadow. He lifted it slowly and felt his heartbeat catch. Inside were delicate slips of paper, letters, worn and folded too many times, each stamped with a name that did not belong to him. Maylin had not come to his ranch by chance. And someone out there might be searching for her still. Morning came quietly, as though the sky were afraid to disturb the woman sleeping in the guest room. Pale winter light slid through the thin curtains, turning the frost-coated window into a sheet of muted gold. Elias Holt stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening. No footsteps, no stirring, only the soft hum of a house that had not known gentle company in years. He found himself holding the small cloth bundle he had discovered the night before, the letters resting inside like fragile birds. He had not opened a single one, though his fingers had hovered over the seams more than once. Something about that restraint surprised him. He was not a man known for patience, yet something in the quiet dignity of Maylin Chen made him tread carefully, as if her secrets were not meant to be handled with calloused hands. When he stepped into the kitchen, he halted. Maylin was already there, sleeves rolled, hair tied back loosely, moving through the room with the same silent grace she had shown the night before. A pot simmered on the stove, releasing soft tendrils of steam that carried the warm scent of ginger and broth. She looked up when she sensed him watching, offered a small nod, then continued without speaking. He tried to insist she rest, but she had already read his intent and answered with motion instead of words. She ladled broth into bowls, set them gently on the table, and stepped aside. Maggie arrived moments later, drawn to the smell like a moth to lantern light, followed by Tom, who entered with snowflakes stuck to his hair and a grin already stretching across his face. Breakfast tasted like something Elias hadn't felt in a long time. Home. He didn't say so aloud, but Maggie noticed the shift in his shoulders, the way he sat straighter, as if the weight on him had thinned by a thread. Tom chattered enthusiastically about how Maylin should stay through the end of the cold spell, for the ranch needed someone who could cook better than he ever could. Maylin only lowered her gaze, unsure how to receive such warmth, unused to being wanted in any form. After breakfast, she reached for the dishes the same way she had reached for them the night before, quietly, automatically. But Elias stepped forward this time, stopping her with a gentle lift of his hand. Her eyes flicked up, puzzled. He told her she didn't need to do more, she had already done plenty. The odd thing was that his voice softened despite his attempt to sound firm. It softened without his permission, as though speaking to her required the surrender of all harsh edges. Still, she washed the dishes anyway, her motions steady, deliberate, as if the act itself was a tether to something she feared losing, purpose, perhaps, or peace. Elias left the house to check the horses, but his mind kept drifting back to the woman moving through his kitchen like a ghost slowly remembering how to be alive. Snow crunched under his boots as he walked to the barn, each step echoing with thoughts he didn't want to name. He had taken in travelers before, men mostly, rugged drifters needing one night's warmth. None of them shifted the air of the ranch. None of them rearranged his silence. But Maylin. She seemed to see the corners he kept hidden from the world, and she did so without asking anything from him. Tom joined him in the barn, leaning against a post while brushing down a restless mare. He asked if Elias planned to keep her on for more than a day. Elias responded that she would leave tonight or tomorrow morning. Tom stopped brushing, raised an eyebrow, and said the house hadn't felt this alive in months. maybe years. Elias told him not to read into things that weren't there, but Tom only smiled knowingly, the way younger men do when they see an older man pretending not to feel something. By noon the sky had turned a washed-out silver, holding the faint shimmer of new snowfall. Maylin had finished mending the torn places in the old coats stacked near the hearth and was quietly sweeping the floor. Maggie watched her with an expression that held more worry than delight. She had lived long enough to know that gentle souls often carried the heaviest burdens. Something about Maylin's silence unsettled her, not because it was empty, but because it was too full. When Maggie asked where she was headed after tonight, Maylin hesitated. The broom paused mid-swing. She said she would walk to the next town, perhaps find work in a boarding house or kitchen. Her voice remained even, but a faint tremor rode beneath the calm, like a bird hiding its broken wing. Maggie's eyes narrowed, reading the tremor well. She told Maylin no woman should travel alone in winter. Maylin bowed her head, but she did not argue. Some truths were too large to fight. Later that afternoon, Elias found Maylin in the yard, gathering firewood with small, determined motions. He told her she didn't have to do that. She answered that she wished to repay kindness. He wanted to tell her that her presence had repaid more than she understood, that the house had breathed differently since she arrived. But the words caught in his throat, unformed. Instead, he simply took the bundle from her arms and carried it inside. Wind swept a loose strand of her hair across her cheek, and she tucked it behind her ear without noticing how he watched the gesture with a strange ache. She thanked him softly, then turned back to the snow-dusted woodpile, unaware of the quiet war forming behind his ribs. Evening approached with a hush, carrying the heavy scent of snow waiting to fall. The ranch glowed with the warm light of lanterns, and for the first time in years, the house seemed to lean toward life rather than memory. Maylin prepared supper again, this time without being asked. The warmth in the kitchen felt deeper than fire. Yet beneath that warmth lay something unsettled. As they ate, Maylin's gaze drifted often toward the window, her fingers tightening around her spoon whenever a distant sound broke the quiet. Elias noticed. Maggie noticed. Even Tom, cheerful as he was, fell silent when Maylin flinched to the sound of hoofbeats far off on the road. When supper ended, Maylin excused herself, saying she needed a moment outside. Elias followed after a breath, drawn by instinct more than decision. He found her standing at the edge of the porch, hands clasped as if bracing for impact. She whispered that someone might come looking for her. Before Elias could ask who, a lantern flickered in the distance, a rider approaching through the drifting snow. Maylin stepped back, breath trembling, and the old fear in her eyes told Elias that whoever rode toward them was not a friend. The rider came into view with the slow inevitability of a storm rolling over the plains, his lantern swinging from the saddle like a restless eye searching for something lost. Snow drifted in thin ribbons around his boots as he dismounted, brushing flakes from his coat with a rough, careless hand. Maylin stood behind Elias, small and steady, but he felt the tremor in her breath even without looking back. The stranger called out in a voice cracked by whiskey and winter, asking if this was Holt land. Elias answered with a curt nod, stepping forward in a way that made clear he was not a man easily shifted. The rider introduced himself as Jared Pike, though the name came wrapped in a smirk, as if he expected it to be recognized. Elias felt no flicker of recognition, but Maylin's sharp inhale told him everything he needed to know. Jared's gaze slid past Elias and landed on her with the smug ownership of someone who believed the world owed him obedience. He said he had been searching for her, claimed she'd wandered off with something that belonged to him. Maylin lowered her eyes, not in submission but in the quiet dread of a woman who had escaped only long enough to fear being dragged back. Elias's jaw tightened. He asked what Jared meant. Jared explained with exaggerated patience, as if speaking to a child. Maylin had worked under him in the last town, cooking and cleaning in exchange for shelter after her savings ran thin. She owed him weeks of labor, he said, before she slipped away in the night. He even had a paper suggesting her obligation, though it remained conspicuously tucked in his coat. Maylin whispered that the paper was forged, the labor unpaid, and the promises lies. Her voice was calm, but there was a crack in it, a crack that revealed wounds much older than this encounter. Jared interrupted her with a laugh that felt like a fist thrown in the dark. He said women often misunderstood their place, especially foreign women with no family and no voice in these parts. Elias took a step forward before he realized he had moved. He told Jared the woman was under his roof for the night, which made her his responsibility. Jared's smile faltered, replaced by the flicker of a man deciding how much trouble was worth the fight. He tipped his hat stiffly and said he would return in the morning to retrieve what he claimed. When Jared rode away, the wind seemed to exhale with him. Elias turned to Mei Lin, expecting her to break, to shatter into the fear she kept pressed inside her ribs. Instead she apologized softly, as though her existence were an inconvenience. He told her she had no reason to apologize, but the words came out rougher than comfort should sound. She nodded anyway, as if she understood the gentleness he meant beneath the grit. Inside, Maggie and Tom waited with questions written all over their faces. Mei Lin explained little, and Elias explained even less. The house was uneasy that night, each person lying awake longer than usual, listening for hoofbeats that might return sooner than dawn. Elias barely slept at all, choosing instead to sit by the dying fire, the cloth bundle of Mei Lin's letters resting beside him like a puzzle he had not been invited to solve. Before first light, Mei Lin found him there, wrapped in a blanket that looked too thin against the cold. She said she needed to leave, quietly, without making trouble. She thanked him for his kindness, calling it more than she deserved. Elias felt heat rise in his chest, a slow, burning refusal to let the world convince her she was worth less than the dust on the windowsill. He told her she was safe here, at least until things were set right with the law. Mei Lin smiled then, small, fleeting, like the flicker of a candle that regrets its own brightness. She said she didn't trust the law to hear the voice of someone like her. Elias didn't argue. He simply said he would stand beside her when she spoke, and sometimes that was enough to steady a voice long ignored. By mid-morning the sound of hooves approached again, this time not one horse but 3. Jared returned, flanked by 2 men who wore the impatient swagger of hired muscle. They waited near the barn while Jared marched to the porch, demanding Mei Lin be surrendered immediately. Elias refused. Jared reached for the contract tucked in his coat, waving it with triumph, but Maggie stepped forward to examine it. Her eyesight was old but her instincts young. She declared the signature forged, the numbers altered, the seal mismatched. Jared spat that town folk always took the side of a pretty woman. Mei Lin flinched at the word pretty, as if it were a lie she didn't know how to hold. Tom stepped closer, telling Jared to take his threats elsewhere, but Jared only laughed, saying this wasn't about threats, this was about property returning to its rightful place. Elias's patience snapped like a branch under heavy snow. He told Jared that Mei Lin was no man's property and that any claim he wished to make would be decided by the town judge. Jared said he welcomed the judge, confident in his fabricated story, and promised to gather the man by afternoon. When the judge arrived, the yard filled with the tense hush of a courtroom formed out of winter air and trampled snow. The judge examined the contract, asked questions, listened to Jared's half-lies and Mei Lin's quiet truths. She spoke in a steady tone, though each memory dragged a shadow across her face. She recounted how Jared had taken her savings, threatened her reputation, turned townsfolk against her with whispers she could not outrun. The judge listened, but Elias could see the hesitation brewing behind the man's eyes. The law was clear, the situation muddied, the truth buried beneath the weight of a society that had never stood fully on her side. He declared he would make a decision the following morning and warned both parties not to leave the area before then. Jared smirked, confident the night would bend in his favor. As the sun dipped, Mei Lin retreated to the barn, feeling the weight of old battles pressing against her ribs. She folded her hands in her lap, whispering apologies to a world that had never offered her a place to stand. Elias found her there, sitting on a bale of hay, knees drawn slightly inward, as if bracing for impact. He sat beside her without speaking, their breaths rising in the cold like twin questions. She confessed she had spent years moving from town to town, believing if she stayed in one place too long, her past would find her. She said people saw only her foreign face, heard only the quietness of her words, never the strength she carried in silence. When she lifted her eyes, Elias saw the echo of someone who had learned to build walls not for safety but for survival. He told her she did not need to run tonight. The judge would see the truth. Mei Lin said nothing, but her fingers trembled against the hem of her coat. They sat there until the barn lantern flickered, the flame bending in a draft neither of them felt. Outside, footsteps crunched across the snow, heavy, rushed, purposeful. Elias stood quickly, instinct sharp as a drawn blade. But Mei Lin remained seated, frozen in a stillness carved by fear. Tom burst through the barn door, breathless, eyes wide. He said Jared hadn't gone to town after all. He had been seen at the far edge of the ranch, speaking with a man who carried a rope. The news struck the air with a coldness sharper than winter itself, settling between them like a shadow that refused to move. Tom's words hung there, echoing through the dim lantern glow of the barn. Jared wasn't preparing for the judge. He wasn't waiting for morning. He was planning something in the dark, something knotted with rope and anger, something that meant Mei Lin would not see another sunrise if fear had its way. Mei Lin's fingers curled into the hay beneath her, tightening as if she needed to anchor herself to anything solid. Elias stepped toward her, the boards creaking beneath his boots in a slow, protective rhythm. She looked up at him, her breath trembling in the cold, and for a brief moment he saw not fear but exhaustion. Years of it, layered like the rings inside a tree that had weathered too many storms. Elias told Tom to stay with her while he stepped outside. But Mei Lin rose quickly, refusing to let him go alone. Her voice was soft yet carried a stubborn edge, the edge of a woman who had been chased too long to sit idle now. Elias hesitated, not wanting her near danger, but she lifted her chin, and in that quiet defiance he saw a courage that had been forced to hide its own brightness. They crossed the yard together, snow crunching underfoot, the sky a deep blue swallowed by creeping darkness. Lantern lights spilled across the porch, casting faint halos along the wood. Maggie stepped outside just as they approached, asking where Elias was headed with that look only older women wore, the one that knew trouble by scent alone. Tom whispered to Maggie what he had seen, and her face tightened with something heavier than anger. She took Mei Lin's hands in her own, warm palms against cold fingers, and told her she didn't deserve this, not after all she had endured. Mei Lin smiled faintly, as if unsure where to place the kindness, and Maggie pressed a small silver cross into her palm. Not for faith, but for courage. Elias moved ahead, and the others followed until he stopped near the edge of the barn. Beyond the fence, the moon barely touched the outline of tall brush where Jared was rumored to be lurking. The wind carried faint voices, low, agitated, plotting. Elias exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He had known men like Jared his whole life, men whose pride grew venom when challenged, men who mistook possession for affection, cruelty for power. He returned to the group and told them they needed to stay close, inside the house where the walls held warmth and safety. But Mei Lin shook her head. She said she wouldn't let Jared drag fear across this ranch like a net. Her voice held no tremor now, only resolve. Elias's chest tightened at the sound, realizing that her strength was not loud but deeply rooted, grown quietly in places where no one noticed. Inside, lanterns hummed softly against the gathering dark. The fire snapped, throwing gold patterns along the walls. Maggie ushered Mei Lin to the hearth, Tom barricaded the back door, and Elias stood near the front window, watching the snow shift under moonlight. Mei Lin's gaze followed him, drawn to the tension coiled in his shoulders. She stepped closer, not touching him, but close enough that he felt the steady warmth of her presence. She said she had been running for so long she forgot what it felt like to stop. Elias answered that she wasn't running tonight, and she wasn't alone. The words came from a place in him he rarely visited, a place he thought had frozen years ago. She held his gaze then, really held it, as though she were carefully unfolding the quiet inside him, piece by piece. Maggie watched from the table, her eyes softening. She had seen grief-hardened men into stone, but she had also seen the right presence turn stone back into beating heart. The silence broke when hoofbeats thudded against the frozen ground, slow, deliberate steps drawing near the porch. Tom stiffened. Maggie instinctively reached for Mei Lin. Elias moved forward, hand drifting near the shotgun propped by the window, though he hoped to resolve this without spilling blood across his land. A knock sounded. Not frantic, not aggressive. A single, heavy strike of knuckles, a warning wrapped in civility. Elias opened the door enough to see Jared standing on the porch, snow clinging to his coat like ash. Behind him, the man who carried ropes stood with a smirk carved into his face. Jared removed his hat slowly, as if pretending manners he didn't possess. He asked Elias to step outside to discuss business without the interference of frightened people. Elias didn't move. He told Jared the judge would settle everything tomorrow. Jared laughed at that, laughed as though the judge were merely another obstacle to twist around. He said he had found additional witnesses who would swear Mei Lin had wronged him. Men owed favors. Men who didn't question orders. Men who enjoyed the sport of ruin. Inside the house, Mei Lin heard every word. Her fingers closed around the silver cross Maggie had given her, holding it so tightly its edges pressed small crescents into her palm. When Elias refused again, Jared's smile faltered. He stepped forward, voice dripping with anger. He said a woman like Mei Lin had no place in this town, no protection, no rights to stand on. He claimed foreign blood made her easy to discredit, easier still to claim. He promised Elias that siding with her would bring trouble he didn't want. Elias stepped fully into the doorway, blocking Jared's view inside. His voice came low, steady, like the rumble before a storm. He told Jared that Mei Lin was under his protection, and no man would take her from this house. Not by rope, not by lie, not by force. For the first time Jared's eyes flickered, not with fear, but with calculation. He took a slow breath and stepped back. He said he would return with the judge at dawn, and he'd bring evidence enough to bury any story Mei Lin told. With that, he turned and rode away, the rope man following close behind. But the danger did not leave with them. Inside, Mei Lin stood motionless. Maggie tried to reassure her, but Mei Lin's voice cracked like birch bark under winter heat. She said Jared would never allow the truth to surface. He would find a way to twist the judge's ruling. Men like him always found a way. Tom insisted they'd stand with her, but Mei Lin's shoulders sagged under the weight of battles she thought she'd buried long ago. Elias approached slowly. He told her she had a right to justice. She shook her head. Justice had never belonged to her. She had lived quietly, respectfully, stitching her life from scraps, and still the world pushed her down each time she tried to rise. She said she didn't wish to bring trouble to people who had shown her kindness. Her eyes glistened in the firelight, reflecting a sorrow that reached far deeper than Jared's threats. She whispered that maybe she should leave before dawn, walk through the snow until her past lost her trail again. Elias stepped closer, his breath warming the cold between them. He told her that running would only give Jared the victory he craved. He said she deserved more, deserved safety, deserved truth, deserved a chance to stand in a place where her voice mattered. Her lips parted, trembling as if unsure how to hold such words. She looked up at him, and in her gaze he found a question she was afraid to ask, a question shaped like hope but whispered through years of silence. Before he could speak again, a sharp knock interrupted them. 3 rapid strikes, urgent, cutting through the warm hush of the house. Tom rushed toward the door, then froze in place. A folded paper had been slipped through the gap beneath it. When Elias picked it up, he saw only 5 words scrawled in harsh, uneven ink, words that made Mei Lin's breath catch as though the world had snapped beneath her feet. We know where she came from. The message lay on the table like a coiled snake, small yet deadly. Mei Lin stared at it without touching, as though even the ink carried venom. Maggie stood behind her with a hand on her shoulder, but the comfort could not sink through the storm bracing itself inside Mei Lin's chest. Elias paced slowly near the window, every turn of his boots a reminder that danger had slipped through their walls far more easily than he wanted to admit. Tom muttered that Jared must have set this trap, but Mei Lin whispered that the handwriting wasn't his. She knew it too well. It belonged to a man from her past, a man who had chased her across 2 territories, a man Jared had likely found to strengthen his lies. She explained in fragments, breath unsteady, that years ago she had refused to work for him when he tried to barter her labor like property. He had promised she would regret it. Now, his promise was pushing its way back into her life. Elias listened without interruption, though inside him something cracked with fury. He wanted to storm out into the snow and end this now, put an end to the threats, the chasing, the long shadow cast over a woman who had done nothing but survive with dignity. But Mei Lin reached for his sleeve, stopping him with the lightest touch, a plea carried more by silence than words. She said quietly that if he confronted them alone, they would twist his actions into weaponry for the judge at dawn. She was right. Elias felt the unfairness of the world settle like ice on his ribs. How quickly truth froze under the weight of lies, how slow justice thawed when a woman with no allies tried to claim it. But she was not without allies now. Maggie vowed she would testify. Tom swore he would speak too. And Elias. Elias felt something rise in him that he had not let rise in years. The instinct to protect, not out of duty, but out of something deeper, something that felt frighteningly close to hope. The hours until dawn stretched thin. Snow fell again, softer this time, as if the sky were trying to muffle the world in a blanket of white. Maylin sat near the fire, watching the flames breathe in and out. Elias sat across from her, their eyes meeting through the glow, the hush between them threaded with a truth neither dared name. She asked him softly why he believed her when so many others had not. He answered without thinking, saying her eyes held truth even when her voice was quiet. She lowered her gaze then, humbled by a gentleness she had not known how to receive. When dawn finally reached the horizon, the light felt sharper than usual, as if the world itself were bracing for whatever judgment awaited. The judge arrived with a solemn expression, Jared with a triumphant one, and behind him 2 men carrying a confidence built from manipulation. Townsfolk gathered in the yard, drawn by the promise of spectacle. Maggie and Tom stood close to Maylin, forming a living shield. Elias remained near her too, though slightly ahead, as if the simple act of standing first could draw danger away from her. Jared presented his lies with smooth, rehearsed charm. He told stories of betrayal, debts unpaid, of a woman who disappeared after causing trouble. The other men nodded along, adding their own twisted threads. The judge listened, taking notes with a tight jaw. When Maylin's turn came, she stepped forward slowly, as though each step carried the weight of all the places she had been pushed away from. She spoke quietly. Not rushed, not trembling, quietly. She told the judge how her savings had been stolen, how rumors had chased her from towns before she could prove her worth, how Jared had used false documents to trap her into labor she never agreed to. She admitted she fled because staying meant surrendering her freedom to a man whose intentions turned darker with time. The crowd shifted, some uncomfortable, others ashamed they had believed the rumors whispered in the saloon. But the turning point came when Elias stepped forward holding the cloth bundle, the one Maylin had kept hidden. He placed it in front of the judge and asked permission to reveal its contents. Maylin looked at him with alarm, but he nodded, promising with his eyes that nothing in these letters would break her more than silence already had. The judge unfolded the papers. Inside were letters of recommendation from families Maylin had cooked for, written before Jared found her, letters praising her honesty, her gentle presence, her dedication. They also revealed that Jared's name had appeared before, tied to accusations of harassment and theft. The judge's eyebrows rose as he read, and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jared lunged forward, shouting that the letters were forged. But the judge silenced him with a glare that cracked his confidence. Maggie testified next, revealing that she had seen the letters in Maylin's bundle before Jared ever arrived. Tom added that Jared had been seen speaking with the rope man, planning something that had nothing to do with justice. The judge finally turned to Maylin and asked if she had anything else to say for herself. She looked at Jared then, not with fear but with a strength that had been quietly building like a tide. She said she would not run anymore, not because she believed the world had become fair, but because she had found people here who believed her voice deserved space. Elias felt his breath catch. She was choosing to stand. Not for survival. For dignity. The judge ruled swiftly. Jared was to be arrested for fraud, attempted coercion, and for conspiring to harm Maylin. His accomplices as well. The rope man tried to run, but Tom tackled him with a force that made the crowd cheer. As the dust settled, Maylin stood in the center of the yard, snow drifting around her like white petals falling at the end of a long winter. Elias stepped toward her slowly, as if approaching something sacred. He told her she could stay here, not as a cook passing through, but as someone who belonged if she wanted to. Her breath trembled again, but this time with disbelief rather than fear. She asked him why offer her a place when so few ever had? He answered in a low voice that ever since she walked through the snow, the house had felt alive, and so had he. Tears gathered in her eyes, soft as melting frost. She whispered that she had never belonged anywhere. Elias touched her hand gently, letting her feel the warmth of a future not shaped by running. Before she could respond, a shout came from the hill, someone calling Elias's name, breathless, urgent. He turned to see a ranch hand racing toward them, waving a telegram. He reached Elias with snow on his sleeves and panic in his eyes. He said the message wasn't about Jared. It was about someone else who had finally discovered where Mei Lin had gone.